All right, hello everybody. I uh, I had already recorded about 15 minutes worth, and I lost the connection, and so I'm trying a little something different here, and hopefully this will be better. But I'm not going to run to about 15, no more than 20 minutes, and then I'll start another if needed, and I probably will need to. But I'm just talking about chapter two, and talking about chapter two, I wish that the author would have made this into two different chapters. The theory section is going to be the most important area for your first exam. You need to read the whole chapter. We will have some questions dealing with the methodology, but for now, I would say that the majority of questions are going to come from the theories. They're very important at this point to understand because all the chapters that come after reflect these theories. And many times I'll tell you, this chapter is sometimes it's dealing with the functionalist perspective. Some chapters have all three perspectives: functionalism, conflict theory, and symbolic interactionist theory. And look at, and that's the best way to do it actually, is that all three of these theories tell us something about social reality. Any one of the theories does not tell us all, even though the early theorists were attempting to do just that. They were giving us these paradigms, these three grand narratives in the early years of sociology in terms of what makes society work. So these are grand vistas, if you will, grand overviews or pictures of how whole societies operate. And over the many years, as our societies become more complex and going through much more development, social change, our theories have been modified. So that the theory of Durkheim in the early years has been modified greatly today in the form of the functionalist perspective. Karl Marx's work in his day has been certainly revamped and updated for a modern, postmodern, post-industrial society. Some of the basic assumptions, however, for these are still there, but it's just that they've been modified to reflect more of what's going on in modern society than it did during their time period. Symbolic interactionist perspective somewhat reflects in an indirect way Max Weber, but of the three theories, symbolic interactionism is an American theory. Most of its antecedents go back to American philosophers, if you will, and there were the Scottish philosophers as well, but for the most part, it was born at the University of Chicago in the 1930s, and it really reflects sort of an American bias, if you will, about how society operates. The other two are much more European in outlook. But all three of these are necessary because they're what we call I call it the founding fathers. The founding assumptions of sociology are found in these three paradigms, which are still, all of these are still with us today. It's just that there's many offshoots. As we go through the chapters, you'll see that there's many offshoots that deal with various topics that are coming from one of these three perspectives, or a combination. Their assumptions can sometimes be diametrically opposed to each other, certainly the political undercurrents, but they also can be combined in many ways. And so that sociologists, and for our students for sure, it's best to look at all three perspectives when thinking about a issue of research. And many times as I said, there's combinations of concepts that will come from any of these three perspectives and can be combined. So they're also complementary. And for students of sociology, it gives us the chance to look, and when we look at society through all three lenses, theoretical lenses, if you will, it really gives us a much better picture of social reality. Again, not taking along a theory, one of these three theories will not give us a picture of everything in society. Each one has its blind spots, as we'll see. But I'm going to kind of cut to the chase and go. Certainly, you got to read these chapters and look at your core concepts. And anytime you got a question about any concept theory, you can always contact me via email, and I'll be glad to help clarify that for you. But on page 39, once you've read this chapter and studied this chapter, it's good to come back to page 39 and to look over figure 2.3, an overview of the three theoretical perspectives. And it has a really nice chart here that you can use. And in terms of our test questions, some of the answers for those questions are right here in this box. So it's a good way to order these three theories and help you to distinguish between them. The functionalist perspective, the founding father of functionalism was Emile Durkheim, as you read in chapter 1. He had a strong belief in the bonds of community. He was sort of a romanticist in a way. He looked at he kind of was wistful about the older pre-capitalist, pre-industrial communities where people lived in tight-knit communities for generations, and there were strong emotional bonds and a great sense of belonging to a community and belonging to each other. And for Durkheim, that helped to produce a sense of orderliness in society and a sense of stability over time and a sense of belonging. So with the advent of his attempt to understand the emerging capitalist industrial order, one of his concerns was the loss of order and stability, because he saw in the society at the time how capitalism tended to usher in rapid social changes, movement of peoples from one place to another, families being torn apart, a sense of drifting, a sense of his term anomie, a sense of being cut loose from the bonds of belonging to a community, a sense of estrangement, akin to Marx's notion of alienation, a sense of being adrift, normlessness, a sense of not knowing what to believe, not a strong sense of not being anchored in a certain set of beliefs, values, and norms of behavior. So he had an answer. Each one of these theorists and theories has an answer about the problems, the great social question that emerged at the time and as the capitalist economy was developing. And that great social question was, why does this society, which produces so much wealth, science, and opulence, why does it at the same time also produce misery and poverty, disease? And because of this situation, these three theorists asked that question. They wanted to try to find an answer. Would this system survive or not? And so for Durkheim, Durkheim felt that the emerging industrial capitalist order would survive over time because in an ironic twist, if you will, the need for belonging to each other, the bonds that hold us together, would eventually be established in the rapidly changing urban environment of modern industrial society. And based on not only in the older societies, that bonding was based on similarities, that people were similar to each other in terms of their values, their kind of work they did. It was a simple division of labor. Farming societies, for example, all the men in the society were farmers. All the women were caretakers of the home and children. And so these tasks, the simple division of labor, made the statuses that people were occupying to be homogeneous. So people were, their bonding was based on their similarities to each other. But he saw the same thing ironically happening, that there was a bonding in modern society, but it was not based on sameness or similarity, but on difference. That our differences with the more complex division of labor, with a stratified system of occupations, myriad occupations, that we could no longer be jacks of all trades, and that we needed each other, bonded to each other, because we needed the work that others were doing, their specializations, in order to survive. So while you were going to university to become a high school teacher of history, for example, you needed the doctor to perform medical functions for society. You need specialists like policemen to police the community. You needed the trash man or woman to take care of the trash. That was their profession. That was their one specialty, but it was an important specialty in the everyday function of society. You needed folks to grow your food. You need others to make your clothing, to make your tools. So because we're all specialized in our own little niche, and based on all our differences in opinion and differences in our outlooks and educational levels, we still, for Durkheim and functionalism, we're still bonded together because of the interdependency of all of us on each other to survive. So sort of a twist of sort of an ironic tale, if you will. But the focus for the functionalist perspective was on order and stability. It borrowed heavily from the biological sciences. And I looked at from biology and looked at society like we look at the human body. Scientists look at the human body made up of various interrelated parts. When those parts are working smoothly, there's a sense of order and stability. Well, from a sociological standpoint, in looking and examining society, order and stability is achieved through the smooth functioning of the institutions, not the body parts, but the interrelated institutions, institutions of family, institutions, educational institution, institution of work, institution of the religious institutions, institutions, the political institutions, the economic institutions. All these, the media now, the institution of media, mass media, all these work to help to socialize, and we'll have a whole chapter on socialization, work to assure that or attempt to assure this socialization never works 100%. We're not an exact science. But it ups the probabilities that the members of society living through these institutions will be socialized to take on the norms, values, the beliefs and behaviors or norms that society shares, and internalize those. And in that way, even though we're all highly individualistic in many ways, we all conform our behaviors socially. And I always like to use the saying that if you think about it, the things that we aspire to be and do in society and the needs of the society are the same, or they meet. That is, we tend to want and do what society expects us to do. The needs of society are met through our own desires, if you will. Channeling those desires. How are those desires, those aspirations are channeled is through the process of socialization. So as we are socialized from birth to death in the ways of society, the do's and don'ts, the values, the beliefs, the motivations that come from our socialization. All these, when they work together in a smooth functioning whole and through the institutions, society is stable and orderly for the most part. Not always, but overall, there's a sense of order. So the question is in a complex society like ours, how is order maintained and stability when there's so many people going in so many divergent directions? You would think there'd be way more murders, way more rapes and pillaging and disorder than there really is, right? I mean, we tend to emphasize that, especially for shocking, for news, and we tend to focus on the negative a lot of times on news shows. But when you really look at it overall, still there's that for the most part, society is orderly and stable. People tend to do what's expected of them. So the key terms are function, why things function and how they function in a way that produces order, or their dysfunctions, how they produce dysfunctions in society. And when they do, like a body becomes sick, what do we need to do? What kind of policies need to be put into place to help bring that, to heal that dysfunction and bring everything back into order again? So the political underpinning, if you will, of the functionalist perspective is liberal reform. That we don't need to radically change the structures of the order, if you will, of society. It's just that when it goes awry, we just need to reform certain aspects. The central order and stability of the society is taken for granted. It's not questioned. So it tends to be reformist and liberal in perspective. The central question is, why does a part exist in society? What are the anticipated and unintended consequences of a part? A part meaning, for example, any social phenomenon, why does it exist in society and what role does it play? I always like to say that if there's something going on in society and it's been going on for many years, decades, why does it still exist? It must be playing some kind of role, even though it may be negative. Why does it still exist? There's been, we've had wars on poverty going back 1960s. A lot of most of you are too young, but there was a declaration of JF Kennedy and continued with LBJ, a war on poverty. We must stamp it out. Well, it never got stamped out. Maybe it's been better in some years than others, but here we are in the 21st century, and one of the biggest issues right now is the extreme wealth inequality between the haves and the have-nots. That it's worse now than it was at the time of the Great Depression. Why is it still there? Why is there so much poverty? Well, functionalists can always help give us a ironic lesson or tale answer for that question. So we're going to be looking at an article by a famous functionalist, Herbert Gans, who looks at the functions of poverty. And it looks at poverty. Why has it existed for so long? It's because it plays a positive role in society. On a symbolic level, poverty exists for us who are striving to succeed, to show where we will be if we fail. So if you fail at all your efforts, you're going to end up where these folks are. So it acts as a symbolic borderline, if you will, to keep the normals in check, if you will. You don't want to go down that road. Same thing with homelessness at a symbolic level. At another level, in terms of work, poverty exists because it helps to support and maintain a whole host of middle-class college degree required middle-class jobs. So, for example, almost all of your social work position types of jobs depend on the poor for the very existence of your occupation that you went to school all those years to get a degree for. And to some extent, policing is based on the existence of poverty and its relation to crime. Secondhand clothing stores, used cars. Though many of us also buy used cars these days. But used anything, like day-old bread and older foods, leftover foods from restaurants in some states will give it to the poor. All kinds of jobs, food stamp offices, they're run for the poor, welfare. All these jobs depend on the poor. So it's functional in that it supports the order symbolically as well as economically and in many other ways, as Gans will show you in that article. And we can say the same thing. We can take another negative like crime, and we can show all the positive functions it plays in society. And you can see some of these examples in the chapter. So it looks at a balanced analysis of positive and negative effects. It also talks about functions that are manifest and functions that are unmanifest. And, we could hold a whole litany of examples. One of the manifest functions, for example, of education is for people to go to school and to learn and to grow in knowledge and become a better person through that process. That's the manifest function of education. The unmanifest, and to make us, individuals, but an unmanifest function of education, it socializes us into further, once we leave the families and we begin to grow up and we're in school, the underlying curriculum, the unintended function is that it socializes us into the values, the norms, beliefs of the larger society. So not only are we learning about history, we're also learning to be individuals, to compete with others through the symbol of grades, for example. How we sit in a classroom. Instead of a circle, we sit one person in each seat alone. You're an individual. We stress individual effort. When you succeed, it's because of your efforts. When you fail, it's because it's your fault for not studying. We also learn to work in groups. We learn to be on work at time, be at somewhere on time, to discipline our time use, to discipline our study habits, our work habits. All this is a part of the hidden curriculum, if you will. So I like to say that manifest functions are generally out in the open, what most people think of in common sense ways, whereas the unmanifest really is sort of the bedrock of sociological analysis, getting at what's not seen, the unmanifest reason why it exists. Policing is supposed to exist on a manifest function because it protects us from criminals and lawbreakers. The unmanifest function of policing always gets back to this concept of socialization. The unmanifest is that the police force socializes all of us to be to behave ourselves and to conform to the norms of society. And if we don't, we know in our minds there's boundaries. So I know that if we involve in certain behaviors and cross that line, that force of the state is there to be brought against us. So it's not only there just to keep us safe from criminals, it's to keep us all safe from. It's to keep us all within the borders, the boundaries of normality, if you will, to conform to the norms, not to deviate. And if we do, then this force is there that can be brought to bear to bring us back in line. So that's another good example. And there's many, many more, and we'll see some more as we go. Conflict perspective, the father of conflict theory, we credit to Karl Marx. Karl Marx's theory about the capitalist order and the problems with the central problem of capitalism being a conflict between the interest of those who own the means of production of society, the banks, the factories, and other aspects, the tools, and that it was in private hands, and it was utilized to make private profit. It wasn't utilized to make it wasn't made to redistribute income throughout the whole society. It was to put into somebody's bank account, right? Private hands. And Marx saw that that the bourgeoisie, or the ruling class, then had certain interests that were diametrically opposed to those of under them, who were the laborers, the working class, who only had their labor to sell to a bourgeoisie and the capitalist owner to make any living. And because of those two, on the one hand, for the workers, it was to get as many rights as possible, to be able to work to get better wages and benefits. But on the other hand, for the capitalists, it was to keep labor cheap, because that was a part of the production cost. And the cheaper they could keep their production costs, selling their products dearer, then they could outcompete their competitors and be able to make a profit margin. And that's really what capitalism for Marx is all about. It's not about democracy. It's not any of these philosophies that we sometimes that becomes sort of a facade of legitimacy is another concept that this economic system is based in. It gets wrapped up in the facade of legitimacy as it's God's way of doing things. It takes on a sort of religious connotation, and also a patriotic connotation that that the capitalist system is also what's good for General Motors is good for the nation kind of nation. But Marx exposes the truth that capitalism is simply an economic system based on private property or the making of profit, individual profit or corporate profit for those that own the means of production. And in that instance, then it's simply an economic logic. And you can decouple. We can see, for example, in a communist society like China, capitalism can work just fine. It doesn't have to have democracy to work. That democracy is a political ideology, not an economic system, for example. Same thing with socialism. You can have a socialist economic system under a democratic system. We see a lot of that in the mixed economies in Europe, where you have democratic societies in Europe, Western Europe, but and they have a lot of what we would think of as socialist programs in their society. What we call a mixed economy. They'd certainly have capitalist economy, but a lot of other features in the society are, to some extent, varies from one country to the next, are socialized. Healthcare, for example, can be socialized. Education can be socialized. Housing can be socialized. And then other aspects then the market still can thrive in other areas. And it's under a capitalist system of private ownership, whereas certain features, certain areas of life are socialized for the benefit of the nation as a whole. That's the notion of a social democracy, if you will. And we'll be coming back to some of these ideas later. The dominant and subordinate groups are always in conflict over scarce and valued resources. This is the central tenet of conflict perspective. Conflict over scarce and valued resources. Guys, I'm going to stop this particular video now. And I'm going to have it loaded up and get it loaded up, and then I'm going to start another. So we'll take up with part 2 here in just a few. Alrighty. See you in just a few. Bye.